This deep dive, this time it's a story that almost feels like something you'd watch in a movie. You know, a political thriller. We've got a media ambush. It goes completely viral, even ends up in court. But what I think is so interesting about it is it all starts because of just one interview. We've got research and articles and all sorts of stuff to get through. So let's just jump right in and see what we can find.
It is wild how just one event can, set off a whole chain reaction. Like, this case, it really shows you how much power the media has and how individuals kind of have to deal with that.
Exactly. And right at the center of this whole thing is Karoline Leavitt. She's a, up and coming conservative politician, and she gets invited on this big talk show. They tell her it's going to be this policy discussion. But things go south pretty quickly. Do you think, going in, she knew it was going to be an ambush?
It's hard to know for sure, but when you look at, everything that happened, it's pretty obvious that the hosts had something else in mind. It wasn't just a regular interview. The way they asked their questions, they kept interrupting her, even their body language. It all points to them trying to make her look bad on purpose.
Yeah, it's like they were trying to take her down. It wasn't a real conversation at all. Like in one of the sources, they even quote one of the hosts saying something like, "Let's be real, Caroline, you're not here because you're qualified or anything. You're just here because you're loyal." It's so disrespectful, don't you think?
Oh yeah, it's way beyond just disagreeing. They were attacking her personally. That's actually a tactic you see a lot when someone's trying to discredit someone else.
Ah.
They don't want to actually talk about the ideas, so they attack the person's motives instead. That way, anything she says just gets dismissed before she even has a chance to explain it.
That's so interesting because that's exactly what I was thinking. The sources all talk about how they used loaded questions and kept laughing at her like they thought she was a joke. They even say stuff like, "Women like you hold us back. You're a pawn in all of this. You know it deep down," or something like that. It feels like they were trying to get a rise out of her, make her look unstable.
Oh, definitely. That's classic manipulation. They use emotional language and personal insults, so she'll get defensive and look flustered, which makes her seem less credible. But what's amazing is how Caroline handles it all.
You're so right. They just kept attacking her, but she stayed so calm, even through some pretty good comebacks. My favorite part is when she says, "If standing up for what I believe in makes me a pawn, then fine, I'll be a pawn. But at least I'm not a puppet."
That's a key moment because it shows she's not playing their game. They're trying to control the story, but she's not having it.
And the audience sees that too. That's where things really get interesting. The interview clip blows up online, and it's not just a one-sided attack anymore. Suddenly, everyone's talking about media bias and holding the media accountable. What do you think caused such a big reaction?
I think it was a few things. First, the way the hosts acted. It was so over the top and aggressive. It was shocking, even if you didn't agree with Caroline's politics. It made people angry and brought together people from all sides who felt like the interview was just wrong.
And it feels like the internet really made it bigger. All the sources mention hashtags like media bias and Stand with Caroline trending everywhere. Do you think this case shows that people are losing trust in the media?
I think so.
Yeah.
Social media lets people share their opinions and bypass the usual gatekeepers. In this case, viewers used it to hold the media accountable.
Right.
They could react instantly and show they didn't like how the hosts were acting.
And it went beyond just online outrage. Some viewers actually started targeting the show's sponsors, telling them to stop supporting it. That seems like a pretty direct way to hit the network, right?
Oh, it definitely is. Viewers basically showed that they had economic power. They could affect the network's money.
Right.
That kind of consumer activism can be really effective.
Right.
Advertisers care a lot about what people think, and they usually don't want to be associated with anything controversial.
So what did the network do? Did they, respond to the viewers?
Well, at first they tried to just downplay it. They called it a spirited debate and acted like there was no bias. But all the public pressure and the risk of losing sponsors, I think that made them take it more seriously.
This is where things get even crazier. A former producer comes forward, anonymously at first, and she reveals that this wasn't just a one-time thing. They always targeted conservative guests. Was the network in on it, or was it just these producers going rogue?
That's a good question, and the investigation tried to answer that. But the fact that this producer felt like she had to say something, even anonymously, it tells you that the show's culture was okay with that kind of behavior.
Yeah.
Or at least they were turning a blind eye to it.
It wasn't just her word either, right? There were leaked emails and memos that back up her claims. It's kind of shocking to see how planned out and cynical it all was.
Yeah.
Did those leaks come from the whistleblower?
It's not clear how they got out, but they really hurt the network. The emails show producers being told to make sure she stumbles and to cut her off if she gets too comfortable,
Wow.
which proves that they were trying to sabotage Karoline's appearance.
That's a huge violation of journalistic ethics. When something like this happens, does it hurt a network's credibility in the long run?
Absolutely. Trust is the most important thing for any news organization.
Yeah.
Once that's gone, it's really hard to get it back. All of this really damaged the network's reputation. It made people question if their reporting was honest and if they were really committed to being fair and balanced.
So we've got this explosive interview, the internet goes crazy, we've got a whistleblower and all this leaked evidence. It's looking pretty bad for the network. So where does the story go from here?
Well, that's when Karoline decides to take action herself. She sues the network.
Wow.
And that lawsuit becomes the center of the whole controversy. It puts even more focus on how the network operates and raises questions about whether the media can be held accountable in the age of the internet.
Things are about to get even more intense. I can't wait to see how this all plays out. But I think we need to take a break here, and we'll pick up the rest of the story in the next part of this deep dive. You won't want to miss it.
Welcome back. It's crazy how this whole thing unfolds, right? From one interview to a full-blown lawsuit, It really shows how when someone decides to speak up, it can shake things up big time. Like, it challenges the whole power structure between regular people and these huge media companies.
It really does. In the last part, we were talking about how Karoline Leavitt decides to sue the network. You said that this was a big turning point in the whole story because it brought so much attention to this whole idea of making the media accountable for what they do. Can you tell us a little more about what she was hoping to achieve by going to court?
Well, her lawsuit was important for a few reasons. It wasn't just about her personally, like getting back at them for hurting her reputation. It was about holding the entire network responsible for their actions and setting an example for how the media should treat their guests, especially when those guests have different opinions.
So it wasn't just a personal fight for her. It was about something bigger.
Exactly. Her lawsuit was about defamation, harassment, and saying that they damaged her career, which are some pretty serious accusations. I mean, it could have had huge consequences for the network.
It sounds like both sides had a lot on the line. What kind of evidence did Karoline's lawyers use to prove their case? We talked about the leaked emails, but was there anything else that helped her?
The emails were definitely a big problem for the network because they showed that they were working together to make Karoline look bad during the interview. But her legal team didn't stop there. They got people who used to work for the network to testify, and they backed up what the whistleblower said about how toxic the work environment was and how they were biased against conservatives.
So it's like their attempts to say that it was just one bad interview totally fall apart as more and more evidence comes out.
Right. It's like a house of cards. The whole thing starts to crumble.
Yeah.
The lawsuit was like opening a can of worms.
Yeah.
It revealed that this behavior was going on way beyond just Karoline's experience. And that made it a much bigger problem for the network because now it wasn't just about one interview. It was about how the whole organization was operating.
It must have been pretty intense in the courtroom. Did the sources describe what happened during the trial?
Oh, yeah. And it sounds like it was a real nail-biter. They had witnesses, presented evidence. Both sides really fought hard to convince the jury. You had Karoline saying that she was the victim of a smear campaign, and the network trying to save face and say they had journalistic integrity.
So what happened? Did Karoline win?
The jury decided in favor of Karoline. They said the network was guilty of defamation, and they had to pay her a lot of money. That decision sent shockwaves through the entire media world. It showed that media companies, even with all their fancy lawyers and PR people, could still be held responsible for their actions.
That's a huge win for her. She must have felt so vindicated after everything she went through. But it sounds like the impact of the case was much bigger than just the courtroom. What happened to the network?
Oh, they faced a ton of backlash. Bad press, criticism from important people, even viewers and advertisers were calling for boycotts.
Wow, they really got hit hard.
Yeah, their stock prices dropped, big sponsors pulled out, and their reputation was basically in the trash. They were under so much pressure that they had to make some major changes.
What did they do? Did they admit they did anything wrong? Or try to fix their reputation?
They did apologize publicly. They said they hadn't lived up to their own journalistic standards. They also said they were going to do internal reviews and make some changes to try and deal with the bias and create a more respectful workplace. And they canceled the show that had the interview with Karoline, saying they needed a fresh start and that they were committed to being fair and balanced.
So it sounds like they were trying to control the damage and get people to trust them again. Did it work? Did people believe them?
That's a good question, and people were arguing about it at the time. Some people thought they were sincere and really wanted to change, while others thought it was all just a PR stunt to save themselves.
Yeah, I can see why people would be skeptical, especially after they tried to ignore the problem at first. Did their actions back up their words?
Well, they had a tough job trying to win back the public's trust.
Mm.
They started new diversity and inclusion programs for their employees, changed their editorial guidelines to be more about fairness, and even hired someone from outside to oversee their reporting and listen to complaints from viewers.
So it sounds like they were taking some real steps to address the problems, but did it actually change the network's culture and how they reported the news in the long term?
There were mixed reactions to their efforts. Some people were happy with their commitment to change, but others still criticized them, saying they needed to do more to really tackle the bias and corporate influence that was going on. The whole case really started a bigger conversation about what journalism's like in the digital age and how hard it is to stay objective and accountable when the media landscape is constantly changing. It forced news organizations to look at themselves in the mirror and think about how their reporting affects people and society.
It's amazing how one person's story can make a whole industry reevaluate itself. It shows how important it is to hold these institutions accountable and demand better. So what happened to Caroline after the lawsuit? Did she disappear from public life, or did she use her platform to keep pushing for change?
Well, her story didn't end with the court case. In fact, she became even more well-known after that, kind of like a symbol of courage and standing up for yourself,
Yeah.
especially for people who felt like the media wasn't representing them or was trying to silence them. She used her platform to talk about media accountability and encourage people to speak out against injustice.
Welcome back to the show. We've covered so much ground. From that explosive interview to the lawsuit and the media fallout, it's a lot to process. What stands out to you as the most impactful part of Caroline's story?
I think it's that ripple effect. That first step she took, speaking out against what she felt was wrong, well, it set off this whole chain of events. And it ended up revealing a much bigger problem with the media. It shows that even when it seems like you're up against a giant, one person's actions can really make a difference.
Yeah, it's like one domino knocking down the next, right? And suddenly, this whole system that seemed untouchable starts to crumble. It makes you think that maybe we're not as powerless as we sometimes feel.
Exactly. Caroline's story shows us that we can hold these institutions accountable, even big media companies. By refusing to be silenced, by speaking her truth, she got millions of people talking, people who were already worried about media bias and who wanted more transparency.
It's interesting how her story resonated with people from different sides of the political spectrum. Like, it touched on something deeper that a lot of people were feeling about the media. Do you think her case changed how we view and consume media?
I think it definitely raised awareness about media literacy and critical thinking. People became more aware of the potential for bias in the news and started being more careful about what sources they trusted.
So we can't just passively absorb information anymore. We have to be active, question what we see and hear, and look for different perspectives to get a more complete picture.
Exactly. Caroline's story reminds us to be informed and engaged citizens. We can't just believe everything we're told. We need to think critically, evaluate information, consider the source, and understand the bias can be present in any story.
That's so important, especially now when information is everywhere but also easily manipulated. Do you have any tips for our listeners on how to be smarter consumers of media? Any warning signs to watch out for?
Great question. One thing to look for is how different opinions are presented. Are all sides of the story given equal weight? Are certain groups constantly shown in a negative light or stereotyped? Also, be wary of emotionally charged language or sensational headlines that are meant to trigger you rather than inform you.
It's like a media literacy checklist. Check for balance, fairness, and objectivity in how the information is presented.
Exactly. And remember, no single source has all the answers. It's important to get your news from different places, including those with different political leanings.
That's a good point. It's easy to get stuck in an echo chamber where you only hear things that reinforce what you already believe. It can be tough, but getting out of that bubble and hearing different perspectives is so valuable.
It is. It helps you understand complex issues better and develop a more balanced viewpoint.
So, reflecting on everything we've discussed, what's the most important lesson we can learn from Karoline Leavitt's story?
For me, it's about having the courage to stand up for what's right, even when it's hard. Caroline didn't let them silence her. She spoke truth to power, challenged a system she thought was broken, and in the end, she made a real difference. Her story inspires anyone who feels marginalized, misrepresented, or ignored. It shows that we can create change, and even the biggest institutions can be held accountable.
That's a powerful and hopeful message. Thank you so much for joining us today. Your insights have been so helpful in understanding this story and what it means for us.
It's been my pleasure. And to our listeners, keep asking questions, keep searching for the truth, and never be afraid to use your voice to make things better.
We hope this deep dive has left you feeling empowered and informed. Remember, the conversation doesn't end here. Think critically, challenge the status quo, and demand better from the media we all rely on. Thanks for tuning in.